for Delhi. We have had 2 summits earlier in Bombay, and yesterday we were at Bombay for the second edition of Family Office Summit. Uh, the topic for today is setting up a family office, and why would someone need a family office setup at all? And who are these families in India who are already in this space, and what are they looking forward to, what is their investment objective, and what all goes through to set up a family office, and what advantages do we get by really setting up a family office network. To my left is Mr. Jay Javeri, comes from a very research background. So my first question to Jay is, why would someone look for a family office setup?
So typically a family office is not for the average pedestrian. So a family office starts making sense when you have significant amounts of assets. And when I say significant, typically in the West, significant starts at about 100 million US. And it's at that level that it starts making sense to have your own office and professionals working for you and for your family's interests, as opposed to having multiple relationships with multiple institutions. So 100 million US is roughly the starting point for a family office. Some will say it's closer to 250 million. But so that's for a single family office, let me qualify that. And obviously multifamily offices, the thresholds would be significantly lower.
So these thresholds work more globally, because family office globally is a global phenomenon which is still developing in India. For India, the same threshold holds, or there is some?
Well, that's always a little tricky, because is $100 million in India worth as much from a purchasing power, or just the ability to move assets and to enjoy a kind of lifestyle commensurate to 100 million? Would that be the same as a place in Europe? Perhaps no, but when you're looking at the leagues of the super wealthy everywhere in the world are pretty much universally recognized as super wealthy. So $100 million in any part of the world will put you into the league of super wealthy. So to answer your question, we are also looking at, regardless of whether it's India or Europe or the United States, is this present generation tends to be more global than the previous generation. So you have the global Indians who've got businesses that are headquartered in India, but they've got offices and other businesses that they've acquired or grown elsewhere in the world. So you have them with multiple residences, with multiple residencies, and that makes them global, in which case, whether it's $100 million in India or elsewhere, it's pretty much the same at that level.
Okay. I'm intrigued to ask you in terms of the setting up a family office for an Indian entity. Globally, there are a lot of practices that get built into setting up a family office, but what would be the main criteria for someone in India looking to set up a family office? It's wealth generation, wealth preservation, or transfer of wealth across India?
It's actually all of the above. So family offices is not new to India. So typically in the past, family offices were a small part of the patriarch's business, where he had professionals in the business, and as part of their role was to also manage the family business, where the patriarch's wife or the spouse or the children would call up the office to either the secretary or to the finance guy, saying they want this done, or movies, tickets to the movies or tickets to the cricket match. We know how that works. Everyone in the office is there to serve the Seth's family. That is now being professionalized. And I think a large proportion of the people in this room are part of that process to professionalize that. And that's a good thing. That's always a good thing, when you can start demarcating private wealth away from the family business, because that has huge implications going forward for transferring of wealth when you have family structures that are going to inherit this. So it's always a good thing to have a professional run and separate family office from the traditional, patriarch's business, which also includes the family office embedded within that business.
Okay. Before we move to other panelists, if you can just throw a light on how big is the market going to be for India, specific to India?
So the good news is compared to the rest of the world, we are in an environment, we are in a region where it's high growth. I live in Singapore, and we are nicely sandwiched between India and China. And growing in importance is Indonesia. So you've got close to half of mankind that is within a 4-hour flight from Singapore. So we are witnessing, I mean, I'm in a privileged position. I'm witnessing growth rates of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% in the neighborhood, unlike Europe, which I think is shrinking to a certain extent, and the United States. Well, we'll just keep them separate for the moment. So how big is this marketplace? So according to our estimates and our research, we believe there are 200,000 people in this world that have assets of more than $30 million, net assets of more than $30 million. Now, 200,000 people is not very large. There are 200,000 people at my bus stop in Bombay. But these 200,000 people control assets of about 28 trillion, that's with a T, 28 trillion US dollars, which accounts for about 13% of the world's wealth. So these 2 lakh people have disproportionate control because of the kind of money that they have and disproportionate amount of influence on the world's economy. So this is at a global level. In Asia, we believe there are 44,000 of this 200,000 that are in Asia, and that includes Japan. And the largest number of ultra-high net worth population in Asia is still Japan, but China is catching up. So bringing that closer to home in India, we believe there are 7,850 people in India who meet this threshold of $30 million of net assets, and they have a collective net worth of about 950 billion US dollars. Add to that about 5,000 NRIs with a collective net worth of almost 1 trillion US dollars. So you have a Desi population in this world of ultra-high net worth individuals of about 12,500 people with a collective net worth of $2 trillion. So this is a very small number, 12,500, but the amounts are extremely large, which means there's plenty of space for all of you to operate. In fact, of this global population of 200,000, there's not a single institution that has even 1% of this business. So the audience you're looking at, while small in number, the wealth that they need managed is extremely large, and for all of us to have a good share of that business. So that's the good news.
Coming to Tariq. Tariq, one of the objectives of family office setup would achieve is intergenerational wealth transfer, and also family in terms of wills and trusts and succession planning. How difficult is in India to set up a trust or talk to client? How open are clients for a succession planning kind?
See, succession planning is something which is very crucial when it comes to larger families. We've been meeting clients on a regular basis, and we've realized that over a period of time, clients are very open to this idea now. I mean, 10 years down the line when we were talking to people, it was difficult to penetrate and make them understand that passing wealth in the right direction, in the right manner is important. But today, while we go by, we meet people, we've come across a lot of people who have been very welcome in understanding what it takes to do succession planning, what are the importance of succession planning, how wealth would get passed on, what are the disputes that need to be avoided within the family, what are the main reasons where one should look at doing succession planning. Over there, a lot of globalization comes in. You've got wealth in India, you've got wealth overseas. How would that be taken care of? How will the beneficiaries who are in India or the beneficiaries who are overseas, how will they get benefited? What kind of structure should be taken to pass on the wealth? What kind of tax implications will come in? Will a will suffice? In most cases, a will would help. In certain cases, a will would probably not be the instrument to use. So identifying the right instrument, trying to put it in a right mechanism, being able to consolidate all the wealth is what's really the key today.
Okay. So while in the process of setting up a trust for a high net worth individuals or families put together, would there be a clash of interest between trustees and beneficiaries at any state of time?
So primarily, I don't think there should ever be a clash of interest between a trustee and a beneficiary. who is a trustee and why is a trustee there? A trustee is someone who's been identified by the settler for the benefit of the beneficiaries. So if there is someone who is there for your benefit, why should he be having a clash with you? There could be a time when there could be a set of beneficiaries and there could be instances where the distribution as per the settler is been quite expressively mentioned in the trust deed. To avoid any kind of disputes, any kind of clashes over a period of time, what gets important is how well you drafted the deed, how well you expressed your intentions, how clear are you in what you really want, and how you want the well to get passed on. The job of the trustee is to strictly abide by what's there in the trust deed. He's not going to take decisions until unless it's a discretionary trust or certain powers have been given to him. But in general statements, a trustee is primarily there for the benefit of the beneficiary. So why would there be ever a dispute arising?
For specific case of India, is there more relying on family members to be trustees or corporate trustees is gaining momentum?
See, that is one space where we are facing a certain amount of challenge. We as Indian mentality, we always have, we're more control freak. We try to keep control. I have clients who are probably at the age of 75 or maybe 80. They're yet coming down to office. They do nothing, but they're yet coming down to office. Nothing moves in the office without the consent of the grandfather. And that's where difficulties come in. The grandfather is not ready to leave control. God forbid if something happens to him tomorrow, the entire family will come to a standstill. They will not know what to do. Professionalism coming in, yes, it has started. People have started accepting that somewhere down the line you have to get professional help. At the same time, you cannot do everything. If your need is to look at asset protection, you should not be the trustee to your own trust. Does that say you cannot be? You can be, but you should not be. So it all boils down to what the real need of the family is. If they're looking at a pure succession planning trust, maybe a revocable trust, which is an alternative to a will, a family member can be a trustee. But if you're looking at more tax-effective structures, if you're looking at more asset protection structures, so a corporate trustee would definitely be very crucial there.
Okay. Hart, a very specific question to you.
Sure.
Especially considering your background in the sense you got funded from one of the family offices set up.
Sure.
Are family offices looking for experienced professionals, or they are still looking at, still not open to an idea of outsourcing and still managing the affairs in-house?
Look, the concept of family office is to obviously set up an institutional framework, an institutional body to work within, right? And when you get into the institutional realm, when you have large pools of capital, as he mentioned, $100 million, $250 million, it is very important to align yourselves with the right type of vendors, the right type of partners, be it your legal aid, be it your accounting team, be it your custodians, the number of service providers which come into place, number of professionals which come into place, each of them having their due importance and due tasks that they need to go about completing. And in our sense, India is opening up as a market. These services were not available so freely in the past. They were not available to the same degree that they are available to us today. The market is definitely opening up. People are more cognizant of these facilities which are available to them. And yes, family offices are moving in the institutional direction.
Okay. Specifically coming from an investment background. So what kind of investment options would a family office looking for right now?
This is a little tricky question. It depends a lot on circumstance. First question is, what is the objective of the family office? Is it mere capital preservation and succession? That is basically a concept which is driven by wealth management practices, something which is very mature in India. Or is the family office's objective saying, hey, I have a core business, I need to diversify away from it and still create a lot of value. In that case, your traditional wealth management practices or asset allocation practices don't necessarily confer with the objective. If you look at the way asset classes have opened up in the country, you had private equity, which took precedence in the late 90s. You have venture capital, which has come in, angel investing, which has now become a more open concept. We have also a lot of reliance now on public markets. A lot of these asset classes have now found themselves in the realm of the public market space. I do believe that is very important for at least a young, nascent family office to give them some time to figure out what their own school of thought is, and then from there on chart a plan on what it wants to do. In the Western world, if you go back to the larger family offices, if you take, for example, the Bass family office, a very large, esteemed family office, they said, look, private equity is where we would want to concentrate. Private equity could be, invest in strong, solid businesses and then create my value. You have other family offices who say, real estate is my forte, move along in that line and then get down into asset allocation. So it depends on circumstances, depend on objectives, but I think it's very important for nascent family offices to develop a school of thought. We're still very new, the concept is new in India, and it will take some time to evolve, and yeah.
Okay. Jay, coming back to you, the need for, so there is a transition that market has started to discuss about from wealth advisors to trusted consultants for family offices. You see a scenario of private wealth management and family offices go hand in hand, or there will always be a scenario of family offices consultants separate than a wealth management specialist?
I think my response is probably going to get me into trouble with at least half the people in the room. I'm a very big fan of family offices and multifamily offices in particular. And that stems largely from the way private banking has evolved over the last 30 years since I've been in the industry. We have seen a number of banks that just vanish. So big names, I mean, I've worked with 3 banks, well, 2 of them were French, which don't even exist anymore by name. So if you have to do due diligence on them, you won't even know where to start. So they've been absorbed and sucked in, and the brand has just vanished after more than 150 years. I've met very few bankers that start a career with one bank, grow old, retire, and die in the same bank. They just don't. They move on. However, the relationships tend to remain the same, but now they're carrying a different card and representing another bank. Clients get fed up with this, especially in this environment of due diligence and KYC and form filling, and it's all done very poorly. And there's nothing more frustrating than going back to the client and saying, what is your full name and what is your date of birth? And they tell you it hasn't changed over the last 20 years. But the banks will just keep asking the same questions. And every one of them is multi-bank. So you're finding an industry, because of mergers and acquisitions and mobility within the industry, that has become pretty homogeneous. What differentiates this homogeneity is when you rock star private bankers break away and you say, I'm going to set up my own shop to continue serving my clients rather than serving the institution. And that's where it starts becoming sexy again for both the client and the advisor, because the relationship remains constant. And when you have a professional whose name is outside the door on their institution, their attitude and behavior, because of the way they're remunerated and compensated, differs very dramatically from a professional who's perhaps looking at where I'm going to be in the next 5 years or in the next 10 years. So I'm probably going to insult the professionals who are carrying big brand bank names, and I'm probably going to compliment those who are carrying names of institutions that have their name on the door.
So this is on transition between consultants to advisors and all. For a family office setup, the consideration should be a cost center or a profit center?
Well, I think, as my fellow panelists over here said, that takes some time to define in terms of what is going to be the primary motive for setting up the family office. What I've found over the last 30 years is, in India, typically, our family structures and our family is not very complicated. Firstly, we are part of the whole common law system, as opposed to civic law in other parts of the world, where you cannot disinherit family members. So things like you cannot favor an older child or a son or whoever it is. And when you start getting into very complex areas of many children from multiple ex-spouses, then it starts getting very complicated, in which case, most of the time, these institutions are set up to protect the family from each other. And that's where the trust structure comes into play very nicely. but those work very well in common law jurisdictions as opposed to civic law jurisdictions. So there is a fair amount of soul searching. In fact, sometimes I would question, do you really need a family office? It may not work for everyone.
Harsh, discussing further on investment first, most of the family offices will come from a particular line of business. And that is being the trend in India. So a particular software industry or related industries. So how difficult is to convince them to move outside of their industry to invest, where they would always say, their expertise lies in, so a technology guy will always say, I would be more biased towards the technology kind of investment.
Well, they have to go back and ask themselves, what is the objective of setting a family office? Today, the objective of setting a family office is to diversify my cash reserves away from my core business, away from my core industry where I obviously already have a lot of exposure, right? It definitely would come more native to them. They are more comfortable with a certain sector, a certain asset class. However, they have to learn to go about understanding the investment process. And this is where I come back to asking the question, what is the objective of the family office? Is it profiteering, which is fine, or is it succession and just wealth preservation? And we do believe India today is opening up. The market is opening up. The financial instruments available to us are a lot more than maybe 5, 10, 15 years back. And we have a new generation of people at the helm of these family offices. And today, family offices have the opportunity to be thought leaders in their respective area of focus, vis-a-vis just following the current regime of wealth management asset allocation. Within this regime, there's a lot more that we can go about discovering, and this is where we do believe it's a good place to start garnering some interest from these family offices. They understand the value of moving away from their core business. That's the main objective typically. And it takes a little bit of give and take, but eventually they do come around. You will have the odd instances where people don't want to give up control, but that's part and parcel of the business.
So you touch upon the idea of asset allocation. Does asset allocation really work in family offices? Or you'll always see one asset class getting skewed always?
Well, the concept of asset allocation in India, in my humble opinion, is not as effective as in Western markets. There's a certain reason for it. The dynamics between risk-free rate of return, growth rates, and risk premium overseas is very different from the dynamics in India. All our financial models that we're using today in India are some way connected to the models which are applicable overseas. They do a fair job in wealth preservation, but then you ask the question, is wealth preservation enough? And more you run this for 5, 10, 15 years, and you come to realize that it's almost an unbeatable battle against inflation. You need to go about developing more skill sets, in changing the bias towards wealth preservation, towards wealth creation, even away from your core assets. There is obviously a sense of fear about what happens to my assets, but sometimes it gets a little overdone. This is where it comes back to the point the family office needs to go about, take a couple of years, figure out what is its school of thought, and then move on to implementing where it feels it's comfortable in having certain exposures. But asset allocation definitely does help. Smaller family offices makes a big difference. As the scale goes larger and larger, you cannot resort to the bread and butter asset allocation models. You have to look beyond the conventional methods that we currently are used to.
Coming to Tariq, for family offices, and especially for intelligent wealth transfers, you would also come across people asking for effective tax planning. Now, some of it is onshore, some is offshore. While opening up offshore, now how do you come around, what is the right jurisdiction for that family to look for an offshore kind of structure?
See, I wouldn't be the best person to comment on offshore, but to the best of my knowledge, a lot depends on where your beneficiaries are. It a lot depends on where your wealth is, where your substance of main business is, where your assets are. I mean, there is no point in creating a cross-holding structure if that's not where you look at domiciling yourself. If your intention of domicile is India, so you rather create something which is more substance in India than create something like a holding structure outside and you living in India. Again, it all depends on what kind of asset classes you have, what kind of structure you've created in the past. Over a period of time, globalization and open structures have been very well accepted now. So you can have a lot of cross holdings, you can have a lot of investments overseas. But at the same time, it's all very important to identify where you're going to be domiciling and where your beneficiaries would eventually be. And that's could be one of the reasons, or that could be one of the ways of looking at what a structure is. Two could be also the kind of businesses that you are in. I mean, if you are into some kind of exports, or if you're into some kind of imports, so what kind of business lines are you in? What's the tax treaty between those countries? Depending on a lot of factors, can a location be identified?
Yeah, you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, you bring up a very important point of domicile. Sadly, domicile comes into play and is questioned usually when there are major events in your life, and usually that major event is death. So one of the questions one has to ask when it comes to transferring of wealth from one generation to the other, I remember when I was a private bank, I would start by asking the person, do you care what happens to your money after you die? If the answer is no, then there's no tax planning to be done. But if the answer is yes, because there are some jurisdictions that when you die, then anything above a certain threshold, 40% of it goes to the Queen, to Her Majesty. Or in the United States, a certain proportion of wealth over the threshold goes as death duty. We used to have death duty in India, which has ruined families in the past. However, when you're looking at the super wealthy, when you're looking at not just the super, but the wealthy, we tend to be an extremely mobile lot. People are settling abroad. People are not settling or not continuing to live in the place that they were born. So domicile, I mean, I'll take my specific example. If I was questioned at 18, where are you going to be in this world? I would have said, Bombay. I left Bombay 20 years ago, even though I return every month. But I'm certainly not considered domiciled in Bombay. In fact, there would probably be 3 countries that would claim me as a resident just so that they can tax me. And that then becomes a very tricky issue. The United Kingdom has probably the most complex residence and domicile definitions. And domicile comes into play only once you die. And that's when the taxmen come to the family and come to the estate and say, your father was actually domiciled over here, and we're going to take 40% of his assets. Thank you. So it's very difficult when a person is 18, 19, 20, 30, 40 to say, right, so where is it that you're going to domicile yourself? And these are people who've got multiple residences. They are living and traveling all over the world. So it gets very complex. And to be able to set up a structure today to try and guess what it's going to be used for in 30 years' time is very tricky. So the more generic you keep it, the probably safer you're going to be.
I think last question for the panel member before we open for question answers. What is philanthropy in India the objective for any family office setup? And it's open to all.
I'll go first. I don't think it's ever been a primary objective to set up a family office for philanthropy. I don't think that's the case, in fact, anywhere in the world. But we are going to see philanthropy play a much larger part in the super wealthy's life. We've seen some of the richest people in the world, starting with people like Bill Gates, who've signed on to this thing called the Giving Pledge, where they're committing to give back more than 80 or 90% of what they are worth. And these are pretty substantial sums. When you look at, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a $60 billion institution. And these numbers will rival budgets of governments. They can help solve a lot of problems that ail this world. When I'm talking, things like poverty and malnutrition and illiteracy. I mean, I sincerely believe Bill Gates is going to be remembered more for his philanthropic endeavors than for having started a company that made you know, mediocre to bad software. And I think that's going to be his legacy. So philanthropy becomes very personal with the super rich. It's one of the things is, how do you want to be remembered? Contrary to popular belief, rich people also die, and they get forgotten. And if they choose to remain alive or to remain in the public's view, it's going to be on the legacy that they leave behind. And typically that legacy is by way of philanthropy.
I guess we'll now open up for question and answer. If anyone has any questions from the panel member. Yeah.
This is to everybody. Very pedestrian question. What is the typical sort of structuring for the fees set up for a family office?
Well, that's a tricky question. However, it again goes back to the objectives. Is the family office here wanting to create another avenue of wealth, or is it mere administration and maintenance, right? When you dive into the former, the Western markets typically charge at 2 and 20, just like how a hedge fund does. There are hurdles, there are certain, it's a performance-linked percentage of what the family office earns. And there are certain questions which are always asked, is this fee model something which is justifiable? Well, definitely yes, because as and more the family grows, more is the family office manager incentivized to go about trying to grow these assets. I don't think family offices are shy. They understand the thought that goes behind these initiatives. It's a little more deeper, a lot more deep-seated than your typical making an investment for the sake of making an investment. There's a lot of thought, there's a lot of vendors which need to come into play, there's a lot of professionalism which needs to go about. It's running a full, thoroughbred institutional organization, and hence these fees are charged. When it comes down to pure maintenance and administration of a family office, it depends. It need not even have to have a fee. It could just be a distribution model, like something which is already running in India. However, I think family offices come to realize the more they pay for it, the better quality service they get, and it's typically how it works.
Yeah, my first question is to Mr. Tariq, specifically, why he thinks corporate trustees are better when you are planning for the tax benefits? And the second question is common to all the panelists. This family office concept is evolving in India. It is very common in Europe and Western USA. Considering, as Mr. Jay has said, the minimum ticket size should be minimum at $100 million. As we don't, because the concept is evolving, we don't know people what should be their objective. We are not clear whether this is a cost center and it's a profit center. So there are so many ambiguities in the center. So what is their advice to this IFAs or the advisor? So what should be their right strategy to advise their clients and everything?
If I understand your question correct, you have something more to say in terms of having a corporate trustee to do better tax planning. Is that what you meant?
Yes. You said like if you are planning for the tax benefit, then the corporate trustees are the better one. Why do you think so?
See, primarily, when you look at appointing a trustee in the first place, okay, let's go one step back. First is that what is the objective that you're looking at? If you're looking at a succession planning trust, or if you're looking at an asset protection trust, the trust, how the trust is defined, how the trust is designed, the tax will vary accordingly. If it's a discretionary trust, your taxes will change. If it's a non-discretionary trust, your taxes will change. If it's a revocable trust, your taxes will change. So that's where you need to first get to that what is your objective, what is it that you're looking for, and then accordingly identify that having a family member on a discretionary trust will work, or having a corporate trustee on a discretionary trust will work. Depending on if you're looking at taxes in the hands of the beneficiary or if you're looking at taxes in the hands of the trust. That's exactly how the taxes work. It really doesn't matter whether the corporate trustee is a part of the trust or is a family member that's a trustee. I mean, the tax slabs would not change or differ in that manner.
And my next question is, considering the other factors, minimum ticket size, and when you are not clear why you are establishing the trust, whether it is for whether it is a call center, and so what is your advice? So what should be the right strategy to give the advice on setting up the family offices?
I think one question which definitely comes in, if I were to think about this a little bit deeper, is where in the life cycle of the family office is the family office currently? Is it somewhere where I'm going to be transitioning into succession planning, or right now is the family extremely young where they have a lot of years ahead of it and I can go about creating value? I think that's a good place to start off, and what type of structuring I need to go about endeavoring into, whether I should make it a profit center or a cost center. It again depends. Am I going in for a more administration setup? Am I going in for a more aggressive setup? These are questions which I think also need to be, with the answer to these questions need to be based on where is the family office at this point in time. If it's a relatively young, nascent family office with a lot of time before it sees succession, definitely you need to go about creating more value. If it's just a family office which is already mature, ready to hand over to the next generation or go about meeting other objectives, it could be better off running it as a cost center.
My question is regarding wealth creation. You said the family offices look at wealth creation. Most of the family offices in the country, which exist in the form of corporate wealth itself. Most of the UHNIs would have most of their monies unlocked within the companies which have grown in size, and they have professional management. Now, what in your opinion, how it would be different, if they went for a family office for wealth creation, and how could that setup be, there could be some kind of a difference in between that, or what could be the advantages of going for a family office which looks at wealth creation as opposed to a company which is running in that format?
I think what you're trying to ask is, if I'm just trying to rephrase your question, is if I already have an existing corporate setup, should I set up a family office outside it, and what would be the benefits of it?
Yes.
Well, first and foremost, for the simple reason, you have an external structure just to segregate assets. You have your core asset, you want to protect it, let it run independently. These are two different, objectives, two different agendas for both these structures in place. The second thing which comes into play is when you do have a family office, it adds a lot of focus on what the entire investment strategy is, what is the immediate objective, what is the agenda. When you combine the two, more often than not, there's an overlap of one on the other, which could influence decisions, and not necessarily for the benefit of creating value or wealth. In my opinion, it is always better to have a segregated structure in place. Sometimes it may not be possible, but wherever it is possible, it is recommended.
What I wanted to say was basically most of these companies, they already have divisions which are investing into various businesses, and they have a corporate board or a corporate team which is basically looking at investments into energy sector, sometimes into other sectors, and they look at wealth creation from private equity in that format within their own wealth. So how does a family office stand vis-a-vis that?
It again depends on the holding company's shareholding pattern. Not necessarily all holding companies have a single family promoted structure. I may have external shareholders, I may have other influences which run the entire structure. Ideally, if you look at the significant majority shareholder, the wealth that he creates, he would like to hive that out. If obviously he already is the single owner of the company, it makes no difference whether he runs at this structure or not. Even that being said, always having a segregated structure helps in just keeping the two businesses different, keeping the two objectives different, and running a more, I would say, a structure which one is not influenced by the other.
And if I may add, I think the objective can be two different. One can be a wealth creation, another can be a wealth preservation. So a family office setup will be more of a wealth preservation for the entire family. And then another corporate structure can be on looking at ideas for wealth creation.
I have a question for the panel, just linked to your question only. In India, when you go to ultra high net families who are into business, so what happens, they have got their own chartered accountancy firms which are doing the business or which are looking after their wealth also. Then they have their own accountants also. So what happens in that case, whether you talk of estate planning to them or you talk of investments also, but more so in case of estate planning, they say it is being taken care by the chartered accountant. But when you look at the papers yourself, you yourself realize, okay, it is not being looked after true to the sense the way it should have been done for the family. So what probably be the way to be giving that comfort to the promoters, yeah, they need the services of a family office, and especially like in the field of estate planning and succession planning.
What you said is very correct, that you will have larger families who will have in-house team assisting them in multiple areas. But at the same time, you will realize that these in-house team that they're working with is quite limited when it comes to knowledge.
Especially the chartered accountancy firms, because they will obviously project to their promoters, fine, like we know it all. Though their main forte would probably lie in taxation, not in other field, not in estate planning per se.
See, that's what's happened over a period of time. I don't want to probably say something that may hurt someone else's emotions at this moment or sentiments, but primarily what's one trying to do? Okay, you're trying to put your foot in everything. Okay, a CA today, managing a family, which stepped into a family as a chartered accountant. That's where his specialty was. That's where his strengths were. Over a period of time, you realize that CA has become an investment banker for the client. He's started floating his own ARN, and now he's also looking at doing some kind of succession planning. So that's where one needs to understand where his core strengths are. That's where one needs to understand where he can do justice. It's not only collecting fees. At the same time, you need to be able to convince the client or educate the client that this is the document that he's going to be preparing over here would probably be a document that's available on the internet, would probably be a document that's been used for another family, and that's where the professionalism of a trusteeship company or someone who's the expert in drafting a will supersede anything else that a CA or someone who's not the expert in that particular domain would do. I mean, what you're doing today, if and a though can change the entire meaning. Today I'm talking to you, you may interpret it in a different way. I may interpret something in a different way. So what you're going to do is you're leaving your will behind and you're leaving it for people to interpret what you meant. So every word that you've written, every line that is there in it has to have a very clear meaning in it, and it has to be very self-explanatory. It can't be compromised, because you're doing this for what? To avoid dispute. And what's the point of complicating it by not doing it through a professional and leaving it for further dispute?
I think due to time constraint, we have for the last question.
Yeah, I have my questions to the panel. In your opinion, how many single family and multi-family offices would there be in India, and is there any regional concentration in terms of most of them in South India, North India, sort of, how would that be?
Yeah, you will have in.
I've got data on a global basis, not specific to India. So globally, we estimate there are 3,000 single family offices. Multi-family offices take different shapes and forms, so there's actually no real number that would give us any sense of accuracy. But 3,000 single-family offices globally, in my opinion, is a little small. That's a small number. So the good news is it's only going to grow. But specific to India, we don't really have, forget precise, but accurate data on that because of the nature of family offices in India. They've existed, like I said, in the past, where one part of the business was looking after the Seth's money, but within the corporation. But I think over the next 3 to 5 years, we'll have a much better idea, especially in the area of single-family offices, in terms of numbers.
Okay, but no data also on family offices which have a clear structure, means obviously which does not, it's not a mixed structure in terms of the corporate money being managed, but like a full-fledged family office being set up. Like we have examples of that happened in India in the last few years.
So full-fledged family offices that are declared and known as family offices, they're very few. I don't have a precise number, whether it's in the dozens, but certainly it's not in the hundreds. It's in maybe a few dozen, which are designated as family offices with that purpose of managing the family's wealth.
Okay, I think with this we'll wrap the session. Thank you for your questions, and thank you.